Great. Thank you, Tammy. Hi, I want to welcome everybody to this webinar. I'm Melinda Kaufman. I'm the SBIR STTR Program Coordinator for USDA. And we're going to convey a lot of information today that we really hope will be of assistance to you. So SBIR and STTR are housed in the National Institute of Food and Agriculture, or NIFA. And this webinar is to help you understand the RFA for phase 2 for FY24, which will close in March. Next slide, please. So a little bit just at the first about the meeting logistics. This webinar is being recorded. So please make sure your microphone is muted so we don't have a lot of interference. And then here, this lists the Zoom tech support. So if you're having any trouble with Zoom, call this number. You might want to jot that down real quick and select option 2. And then throughout the presentation, we encourage you to type your questions in the question and answer box, which is down at the bottom of your screen. So type your questions in there and we will get to them. And then slides in the recording from this webinar is going to be posted after the webinar. It will be posted at this website. So you might want to also just kind of jot that down so you can access them. Next slide, please. This is our USDA non-discrimination statement, and I want to assure everyone that we take this very seriously. And it will be provided in the slides. It will be in the slides that are provided to you. I'm going to summarize this statement by saying that USDA is an equal opportunity provider, employer, and lender. Additional details are included on this slide, and a link to USDA's non-discrimination statement, 508 compliance, and filing discrimination complaints. We encourage you to reference this slide if you have any questions or concerns. And now I'm going to introduce you to the SBIR STTR staff. We're very happy to welcome Dr. Keith Harris as the division director for the Division of Bioenergy. That is where USDA SBIR STTR is housed within NIFA. We're in the Division of Bioenergy, and Dr. Harris is our acting director. You already met me. Dr. David Songstad, do you want to introduce yourself, Dr. Songstad?
Yeah, sure. This is Dave Songstad. I'm the National Program Leader for SBIR STTR. I know I've talked with several of you that are on the webinar, and I'm glad that you're here, and I hope that you find that this is going to be very useful. Okay, thank you.
Great. Next, we have Program Specialist Tammy Neville. Tammy, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. I am Tammy Neville. As Melinda said, I am a program specialist with USDA SBIR, and I will look forward to receiving any of the questions you have at sbir@usda.gov.
And we also have Dr. Naroon Nahar, who she is on special detail right now. So she isn't with us, but she is one of our program specialists and contributes greatly to the program. Our newest member of the team, we're thrilled to introduce our program analyst, Leslie Vanderwood. And Leslie, would you just like to say hello?
Sure. Hello. My name is Leslie Vanderwood. I am the program analyst with the Due Diligence and Foreign Influence program. And I am here to do the due diligence required by legislation as it relates to your RFAs. And I'm just very happy to be here and a part of this webinar.
Great. I think we can move to the next slide. Thank you, Leslie, and everyone. So this is kind of what we're going to cover throughout this webinar. I'm going to give you a brief overview of NIFA so you can kind of get an idea of the landscape here. And then an overview of our SBIR STTR program. And then we're going to go over the request for application details and the application details and documents, the proposal evaluation process, which is probably pretty important for you to understand. And then there'll be a little bit additional information and resources. And of course, we will be answering your questions as we go along. And at the end, anything we didn't get to, we will do our best to answer. This is the NIFA overview. We're going to start on that. It's just a few slides. NIFA is as I said, the National Institute of Food and Agriculture, and it's the extramural funding science funding agency within USDA's. It's REE, or Research, Education, and Economics Mission Area. NIFA, we invest in and support initiatives that ensure long-term viability of agriculture. So we are really interested in providing funding and strategic leadership for programs. We're looking for groundbreaking discoveries. That's, I hope, why you are here, because you have some groundbreaking discoveries in agricultural sciences and technologies. And so for NIFA in general, and for SBIR STTR, we want those breaking discoveries to reach the American public. Next slide, please. NIFA, boy, there are a lot of topics covered by NIFA, and this is just a slide that summarizes some of them. Everything from, as you can see, like advanced technologies, bioenergy, biotechnology, nanotechnology. Of course, we have all kinds of animal and aquaculture, business. That we're very much involved with business and economy. All of these things are things you might expect: education, minority serving institutions, teaching and learning, and workforce development. We're also human sciences, community vitality, family well-being, and youth. Of course, food and nutrition, plants, environment, natural resources, all of these things NIFA is involved in and offers grants that relate to these topics. Next slide, please. Now we'll move into the Small Business Innovation Research and Small Business Technology Transfer Program overview. So SBIR and STTR, what it's intended for is to stimulate scientific and technological innovation, those groundbreaking scientific and technology discoveries. We want to stimulate those, and at the same time bolster small businesses, small businesses are the backbone of the American economy, and we want to help to build those up and serve two purposes at once. So it's transforming the scientific discovery and innovation for both social and economic benefit, and then emphasizing that commercialization, getting those discoveries out into the public. And then, of course, very importantly, we work very hard to foster and encourage participation by historically underserved and women-owned small businesses. And for STTR, which we added last year, that is very similar to SBIR. And we'll go over some more differences, but it's to stimulate formal cooperative partnerships of ideas and technologies between nonprofit research institutions and small businesses. In other words, universities and federal labs and small businesses. Next slide, please. So for, to apply for a phase 2, only you have to have had, been awarded a phase 1 and have completed or be on your way to successfully completing that phase 1 award. And for phase 2, you can only apply for that one time. So we encourage you to make it your best effort, when you apply. Phase 2 is not as highly competitive as phase 1. But we still really encourage you because you only have that one shot. And as far as eligibility goes, each applicant has to apply, qualify as a small business concern. And you have to register with the SBA for for R&D purposes at the time of the award. So to qualify an SBIR STTR award, you must be a for-profit company. You must have less than 500 employees, 500 or less. You have to be operating in the US. You have to be 50% owned and controlled by a US citizen or permanent resident. And the research that you do must be performed in the US. So those are some of the basic qualifications. Next slide, please. So since we do have STTR now, this chart, I'm going to go over it with you, is some of the differences and some of your choices about how you're going to apply for phase 2. One thing to keep in mind is the applicant is always a small business. We've had a little bit of confusion with people, small businesses, thinking that because they are working with a university, closely with a university, that the university is the applicant, but it is always the small business that is the applicant. So when you go to apply, you can apply as an SBIR for an SBIR grant, for an STTR grant, or you can apply for both, which really means either that you are structured, your research is structured so that it would work for you to apply for either. And that's what this both category is. So the nonprofit research institution or federally funded R&D center, and I'm just going to say the university or federal lab because that's usually what it is. For SBIR, we encourage you to do that. You don't have to, there's no requirement that you do that, but we highly encourage you to do that. For STTR, you must partner with a university or federal lab. And if you apply for both, you also must partner with a nonprofit research institution or federal lab. And then the percent of participation, this is one of the biggest differences between SBIR and STTR. So you have to, for participation with that federal lab or university, it's 50% for SBIR, and then for STTR, it's 30 to 60%. And then for both, it's 30 to 50%. And then another big difference, and I would say that these two lines are probably the biggest differences between SBIR and STTR, is the primary employment of the principal investigator. And so for SBIR, they must be employed with a small business. And but for STTR, there's more flexibility. The principal investigator may be employed with either the small business or the nonprofit research institution. And so if you apply for both, then the principal investigator must be employed with the small business. And then a formal cooperative agreement, it's not required for SBIR, but it is required for STTR. And it's also required if you apply for both.
Melinda, before we go to the next slide, I'd just like to hop in. We have two questions in the chat that I think would be really well addressed at this time. One is, how is the percent participation defined?
So I don't know if we have the option of, letting, leave, expand on that a little bit.
No, so in our RFA, we state that the percent participation is defined as the percentage of the budget.
Oh, I see. Yes.
And
Yeah.
so, Leaf, that will be defined by in the budget based on percentage of budget. The other
Yes.
question that we have is, if you applied for and received a phase 1 STTR, for phase 2, could you apply for SBIR, or maybe vice versa?
Yes. Yes. And the answer to that is yes, you can.
This is another really good question. When you apply to both within that single submission, is the grant considered by both programs?
Yes.
Yes. The evaluation for all the proposals will be done concurrently. And then they will be evaluated based on the entire applicant pool.
Yes. Absolutely. And it will also depend on the budget amounts. So if you apply for both, and there's funding, there's funding left over or more funding available in one pool of money, then that can affect your which you'll end up with, SBIR or STTR.
Hey, Melinda, this is Dave. It's also important to communicate that if you apply for both, and if you get an award, there's only going to be one award and not two.
Yep, really good points. And I know we have more questions in the chat, but maybe we'll save them for a little bit later. And we'll continue on. Does that work?
Sure. And I just want to make clear, because we get this question a lot, that we do not have a directed phase 2 program. I know a lot of other SBIR programs throughout the federal government do have a directed phase 2, but we do not. You must have a phase 1. So the type of grants, the project type is research. The applicants must propose a research project as described in the program area descriptions. And then it's a standard type of grant that's described in the program area description. And that's what we consider for review. These are award durations and award sizes. So so for phase 2, I think we have phase 1 up there, but this is actually for phase 2, SBIR, STTR, or both / either. The duration of the award is 24 months. So if you apply this cycle, and you would the start date for phase 2s is always September 1st. And so in this case, you would start September 1st of 2024, and you would go through August of 31st of 2026. The award size is up to $600,000. So you can write your budget for up to $600,000. If you include technical and business assistance, or TABA, it can be $650,000. So for phase 2 differs a little with TABA than phase 1, in that you have to, there's no in-house provider. So if you want technical and business assistance, which we encourage you to take advantage of, then you have to include it with your application. And it is $50,000 that USDA provides. It doesn't take anything away from your project. Cost share and matching. So the thing about all SBIR and STTR is that it is non-dilutive. There's no matching requirement. If you do have matching resources, that is wonderful. That's great for you, but it won't be factored into the evaluation of your proposal. Application details and documents. We'll go over a little bit of that.
This is where I'll hop in, Melinda.
Great. Tammy's gonna take it from here.
Thanks, Melinda, for that background information. Now to the heart of the application details. The RFA is posted at our funding opportunity website for NIFA. You may access that URL to download a copy of the request for applications. The deadline is 5 p.m. Eastern time on Tuesday, March 26th. You must submit your application through grants.gov, and remember that that is an Eastern time deadline, not a local time deadline. Total funding available for the SBIR program is 19.5 million, and for STTR is a little over 2.5 million. On the form where it asks you what program code you're applying to, you would use the respective 8-point, whichever topic area you're applying to, not 10.212 or some other random letter or number combination. You would enter in 8.1, 8.2, etc., depending on which topic area you're applying to. The maximum funding, as Melinda talked about a little bit ago, is 600,000. If you're going to request TABA, make sure you include that TABA plan in your application, and you can increase your budget up to that 650,000. Some notable changes from last year's 2023 Phase 2 application include the requirements of the SBIR STTR Extension Act of 2022. With the disclosure of foreign relationships form, you will have to access this website, the application support templates website, to download a copy of that form, fill that form out, and upload that as one of the other attachments in field 12 that's listed in the RFA. Along with that Extension Act, there were new benchmark documentation standards that were set forth. So make sure that if you fall into one of those categories, that you address those benchmarks and how you've met those. Additionally, the project summary or the abstract attachment is now 250 words or less. There is a template that can be found on the application support templates webpage to have that template for the abstract document. There are many documents that can or should be associated with the application. Some of the key components include the project summary, the narrative, your bibliography, your budget and budget justification. Your commercialization plan for Phase 2 is an essential document. And so make sure you're attaching that commercialization plan. And the disclosure, as I said, the disclosure form for foreign relationships form. Remember, every time you attach a document to your application, make sure it is in a PDF format instead of a Word or Excel document. We are unable to open applications that might come in a Word or an Excel document or attachments in that format. Some other required documents include the biosketch for key personnel, conflict of interest for PDs and co-PDs, current and pending for the same PDs and co-PDs, company commercialization report. This relates back to those those changes in the benchmarks. so that commercialization report is going to be one of those documents to look at. If you're asking for TABA, make sure you look at the TABA plan, get those letters of collaboration from your TABA supporters or the vendor support statements. There's a facilities and other documents and equipment document. And if you have any letters of support, if they're applicable, please make sure you include those. And please note, a letter from your congressman or representative in Washington, D.C. is not considered a letter of support. A letter of support would be from an end user of your technology. A question in the chat is if we can use the NSF versions of the conflict of interest and CAPS form, or is it better to use USDA templates? For the I would just recommend going in, downloading the forms, the USDA forms, and using those in your application. You should be able to transfer that information from one form to the other pretty easily. And so if you could put it on the USDA form, that would be great. There's a question about letters of support. Is there a limit to the number that can be attached? No, there is not a limit to that.
Yeah, we don't, I'll jump in here. We don't really prescribe a limit to the letters of support. So, you know, there's so many things we have to be prescriptive about. So when we don't have to be prescriptive, we try not to be. So it really depends on who you have letters of support from. If you have a letter of support from Bear, then you probably don't need a lot of other letters of support. If you have letters of support from end users, which may be producers, then you might want to have, you know, several of those, 4 of those, you know, maybe 2 to 4, probably 6 at most. So it just depends on how you remember, keep in mind that you're demonstrating how commercializable your innovation is. And so it just depends on how well those letters of support demonstrate that.
Thanks, Melinda. I'm going to leave a chunk of these questions for later, but there is one that I want to address. It says, are there templates for all of these documents? That answer is no. There are templates on the application template website for the conflict of interest, for the current and pending. The disclosure of foreign relationships form is there. The project narrative, the commercialization plan, the project summary, those the key points that should be addressed in each of those documents are listed in the request for applications. So look at those sections of the RFA. We've got a couple more slides coming that are going to go into a little bit more detail of those documents. So look for the information in the RFA for that. And one more question on letter of support. If it's a federal entity that is a potential end user using a letter of support from them, yes, that would be an end user of the product, and so that would be appropriate. Okay. Little bit more, we're going to move into application details. Here's the project summary slide. As I said earlier, a new change this year is the 250 words or less. So please adhere to that new prescription for the project summary. Require a requested font of Times New Roman 12-point font. It should address how the project goals align with the project goals of the SBIR STTR program. And please make sure in your project summary that you do not include proprietary information, because that may be used and published in public sources. Again, make sure this is attached as a PDF. As I said, there is a template for this on the application support template webpage. The project narrative is, has a 20-page limit, that will be strictly enforced. We try to create a fair and equitable, space for all applicants to, submit their application. So the page limits, the line spacing at 1.5 line spacing, 1-inch margins, the 12-point Times New Roman font. This creates that equitable space. And so please make sure you follow this. If you do not, you risk the possibility of your application being returned without going to the peer panel review. Any tables or figures may use 11-point font just to try and fit them in. They may be single spaced for the tables just to try and fit those in a little bit better, but that's the only exception. Again, make sure this is attached as a PDF. And if you do not follow the guidelines presented here and in the request for applications, you are at risk for not having your application reviewed. Here are those items that I mentioned earlier that should be addressed within the project narrative. A through I is included in the RFA, so I don't want to spend a lot of time going in details about this, but these, there is a little bit more of a description for each of these items within the RFA. So please use the RFA pages 24 to 25 as a reference to look at what should be addressed for each of these items. When we move to the commercialization plan, we're going to keep that same format, 1.5 line spacing, 1-inch margins, 12-point font, tables and figures allowed down to 11-point. The commercialization plan will be limited to 10 pages. So again, that's going to be strictly enforced. Make sure you attach that as a PDF. And there are 6 items that should be addressed within the commercialization plan. A description of these 6 items is included in the RFA, pages 31 and 32. So please use that section of the RFA as a guide for developing that commercialization plan. When it gets to application submission time, we can only accept electronic submissions that are coming through grants.gov. NIFA has a grants application guide posted at the website on the current slide. This is kind of a assistance document to go along with the RFA. If you do not find your answer in the RFA, you'll find it in the grants application guide. If there is conflicting information between the RFA and the grants application guide, the RFA is what will be followed. Any attachments, as I have said several times, must be in a PDF format. You may be able to upload other formats as a Word or an Excel document, but we cannot open those documents. So make sure you're attaching them as a PDF. I see somebody has their hand raised. We're not able to allow you to come on screen or turn your microphone on. So if you can please use the Q&A box to put your question in the Q&A box, then we can address that question through the Q&A box, either orally or through a written comment in the Q&A. There is one question before I go too much further. I see, does the references and citation page count as part of either the project narrative or the commercialization plan? And that is no. That the references or citation, the bibliography is a separate attachment. And so that is separate from the actual project narrative upload and separate from the commercialization plan upload. The question about font size for supporting documents, for example, the conflict of interest. No, we do not enforce or require those same formatting guidelines. Although 12-point font is nice and little bigger on the screen for our reviewers to maybe read that. But you're able to use whatever freedom you want in those supporting documents. It's really recommended that you do kind of an application check before you submit your application. They're in the RFA, pages 21 and 22 address this kind of application submission check process. And it is also posted in the grants application guide. So again, PDF format, making sure you have all the files in the correct format. Follow your submission instructions. Make sure you provide an accurate email address. Make sure there's no errors in the typing of that so that we can reach out to you if we need to. If you have any questions with grants.gov, please reach out to them first. And if it's a technical issue on the grants.gov side. And if you haven't heard of any communication within 30 days of the application deadline, please reach out to NIFA staff. And here I'm going to pass the baton over to Dr. Songstad to take over on the evaluation process.
Okay, thank you, Tammy. So we've gone over the process that you need to follow in order to submit your grant application. One thing I'd like to share is to really highlight why it's important to get it in on time. Here's a story I've heard, and where someone waited until 4:30 p.m. Eastern time on the day of closing, trying to get everything perfect before submitting their grant. Then a thunderstorm came along and they had no power. So don't fall into that trap, which is, like over procrastination to make sure everything's perfect, but rather get it ready, get it submitted. I always advise people, submit it 2 days ahead of time, just to be safe. If some glitch comes up, you've got time to address it. So just, hopefully you won't have any glitches, but that's the advice I can give. So you've submitted your application. Let's now go through the evaluation process. So the initial screening, as we've mentioned, there's a lot of requirements that Tammy and Melinda have gone over. And first thing, it's 5 p.m. Eastern time on the day of submitting. That's the deadline. We tell people we give them 59 seconds of grace, because that last second where it becomes 5:01, then it becomes late. So make sure you get it in before the deadline, and make sure you follow the format requirements that Tammy laid out. Don't exceed a 250 word limit for the summary or the abstract, and make sure it's submitted in a PDF format. Make sure that your project narrative does not exceed 20 pages, and make sure that it is in a PDF format. And the same thing with your commercialization plan. Don't exceed 10 pages, follow the font size, make sure it's in a PDF format. Another thing, if the budget request is higher than our limit, it'll be rejected. So make sure you don't exceed the budget guidelines. And your grant application must fall within one of the 10 SBIR, STTR topic areas. And also, if you're seeking funding purely to, develop an existing product where no research is involved, these would be excluded too. So next slide. With for those that go on to review, these are the evaluation criteria. The ones in bold are the ones that are, I would say, more important. First of all, to what degree were the phase 1 objectives met? In other words, to what degree was proof of concept demonstrated? Because phase 1 is all about proof of concept. And also, Going on to the second criteria, the phase 2 scientific and technical feasibility. So the reviewers will be critiquing those 2 points from a scientific side, followed up with the commercialization potential. And this is why we have commercial reviewers involved with phase 2 as well. This is followed by the importance of the problem, the investigator and resource qualifications, the budget, as well as any duplication of grants that can be identified. Additional factors that go into the evaluation criteria. Some applicants will have a CRADA, which is a cooperative research and development agreement, which is a partnership with a federal lab where entrepreneurs can leverage federal resources to help them achieve their goals through an SBIR or STTR application. And CRADAs are viewed in a positive light within SBIR, STTR. We call it our tiebreaker. So if there are 2 applications that are scored equally, we only have enough money for one has a CRADA, one doesn't, the one with the CRADA gets the funds. And you can go to this ARS website that's shown. They'll link you with the Office of Technology Transfer to see what technologies are available that could be options for a CRADA. And you can also go to that link to find the contact information if you want to talk with someone in the Technology Transfer Office. And also, if there's any follow-on funding, which we call phase 3 funding, which typically comes from the private sector, if that's been identified, that's another factor as well. So next slide. So the evaluation process for those grant applications that go forward for review, each will receive 3 technical reviews and 2 commercial reviews. Now, there is a chance if there's a need for an ad hoc reviewer on the technical side, that could happen too. So that's why we say there's at least 3 technical reviews. And these reviewers are all experts in the proposed topic in that area. So they give it a thorough review from the technical and the commercial side. The reviewers do this individually. So, you know, as they'll do it solo. So they'll be by themselves when they do the reviews. They come up with written reviews in terms of the strengths and the weaknesses and a general synopsis statement. Then when we meet in panel, the reviewers, these 5 reviewers then will discuss the strengths and the weaknesses from their own perspectives. They'll discuss, you know, any differences that they might have across the reviews, and then come to a consensus to decide, okay, this one here will fall in terms of ranking versus the other one. So that at the end of the day, we'll have a ranking of the applications from the highest all the way down. So that's the spirit of the panel review process. So next slide. So the timeline of the competitive grant review process, the RFA released in December, March 26th at 5 p.m. Eastern time. That's the deadline to get your application submitted through grants.gov. At this point, that's when the administrative review begins. And then for those that pass that, they go out for a peer review, which will occur during the April through June timeline. And that's at the end of this time period is when the notifications will go out for those that will receive funding and for those that did not. And then the USDA has a process that it goes through in terms of enabling the awards and obligating the funds. And this will take a little bit of time. And typically this occurs about September. So it's about 6 months overall from, you know, the close of the application to when we have funds ready to be used for the awards. And we appreciate your patience. Next slide. So we have some additional information. This is like resource information that you might find helpful. Next slide. If you're not familiar with the CRIS database, cris.nifa.usda.gov, you can go there and then you can search for application or for awards that have been issued previously. And so it's a very, very useful a website. Additionally, if you go to the site at the bottom of the page, it's a NIFA site where it breaks out the awards based on the topic area. And if you open up the website, it'll list, 8.1, 8.2, all the different topic areas. And when you open up each individual topic area, it'll list by year the phase 1 and phase 2 awards. So you can see who has received awards across years. So it's a useful source of information to see what type of awards have been provided in the past. Next slide. Upcoming events. If you are curious about upcoming NIFA events, you can go to our calendar, which is found at this website here, the nifa.usda.gov/events. And you can also request, go to the site for learning about the release of future RFAs as well. Next slide. And there's various grant resources. These are useful resources at your discretion based on what your needs are in terms of the funding opportunities, the competitive grant flow chart. There's a resource even for grant training, to give you some guidance there, a policy site. And there's also a guide to how to prepare and submit NIFA applications via grants.gov. And of course, there's the information that I just talked about through CRIS. Next slide. And at this point, we are at the end of our slide presentation. If you have any questions you want to send to us by email, the best email is sbir@usda.gov, or you can also go to the website, the RFA website, and find the national program leader with each topic area and submit questions directly to them too. And I believe at this point, we're going to address the questions that are in the chat, right?
Absolutely, Dave. That is what we're gonna do. Okay, I've got one question in the chat that I would personally like to address. We've got a question for if the final phase 1 report needs to be submitted prior to your submission for phase 2. And the answer to that question is no. What we do need is for you to make sure that you are ready to close out that award if you're recommended for funding prior to receiving that phase 2 funding. So even if you decide, hey, my phase 2 is expiring in 28 days, today's the 1st of February, and this is a leap year, so we have an extra day. In 28 days, my phase 1 is going to be expiring, but I need just a little bit more time. And so I'm going to put in a no-cost extension. And so you put in a request for a no-cost extension, and you say, oh, 6 months will be more than enough. In May, June, July, when you're contacted and say, hey, we're going to recommend you for funding for phase 2, you have to be ready to close out that phase 1 award by the 1st of September to receive your phase 2 funds. So that is how that process will go. Hope that covers your question. Right now, we do have blocked off for the next 38 minutes for questions. We scheduled this webinar for 90 minutes to make sure that we would be able to cover everybody's questions. I don't know, Melinda, if there have been any notable questions that have come into the Q&A that you've written responses to that that you feel need highlighted. You can come off, you can turn your camera on and come off of mute and we can highlight some of those questions.
Sure, having trouble getting my camera on.
It's on.
Okay. It was a little stubborn there for a second. I'm trying to see if there's some repeat questions that are particularly confusing to people. And please, for the audience, know that you can still put questions in the question and answer the Q&A. So one of the questions I think that came up a couple of times was about if you, for instance, got a phase 1 under SBIR, but you'd like to do STTR for phase 2, that is allowable, and then vice versa. You can change between those two, whichever. We encourage you for SBIR, to choosing between SBIR and STTR, what is best suited to your project? What is best suited to the innovation that you are working on? What kind of assistance do you need? Do you need more support from subcontractors or consultants? If you need more of that, then maybe look a little closer at STTR. If you don't, if you're going to do more as the small business itself is going to do more of the research, then maybe SBIR is a better fit for you. Okay, let me look through some more.
Yeah, one that I kind of wanted to expand or make sure gets talked about was the question, we didn't include letters of support in the evaluation criteria. And they're really wondering, like, do they really matter? And Melinda, I think, put an excellent response in the Q&A. Those letters of support, they might not be listed in the evaluation criteria, but they will be looked at, and they're going to demonstrate that marketability of your innovation. So the reviewers will look at those letters of support in order to address those evaluation criteria that Dave had on the screen during his section of the presentation. They'll look at those letters of support in conjunction with the technical project narrative. They'll look at those letters of support in conjunction with the commercialization plan so that they get to see the whole picture of your innovation and where it's going. So they do hold a value during that evaluation phase.
Yeah, let me follow up on what Tammy just said. The letters of support, you know, there's different extremes. I've seen some applications where there aren't letters of support, and the panelists will wonder why. So make sure you do have at least one. And then the other extreme is if you have way too many. Now, keep in mind, these panel reviewers are basically doing a public service. So if there's like 35 or 40, you know, letters of support, I don't think they're going to read all of them, to be honest. So make sure you choose the most impactful support letters to really focus the attention on those key ones. And because the worst case scenario would be to have one really impactful letter with 39 other ones that aren't, and then it gets lost. So keep it focused.
Good highlights there.
To follow that up, kind of just a segue, if you, while you're working on your phase 2 application, if you just kind of can keep in mind, this is the way I look at it, that if this is research and this is commercialization, then in phase 1, research is taking precedence. In phase 2, they equal out. And then in phase 3, which of course is not usually funded by the federal government, you find funding outside of the federal government, commercialization, it's pretty much all commercialization. So as you're writing your phase 2, remember that both of these things are important, both the continued R&D that you're doing, and you're really starting to ramp up that commercialization piece. And that brings you back to why letters of support are demonstrating that there is a path to the market for your innovation. And so you want to demonstrate that to the panel that we'll be reviewing.
Oh, this is a really good question. That just came in the chat. What are the steps if you want to postpone your application to 2025 phase 2? Is there a guide, or are there any steps or requirements, any notifications that need to be done? Melinda, do you want to take that question?
Sure. We touched on this very briefly. So you can only apply, phase 1 awardees can only apply for phase 2 once. So we really encourage you to make it the best application you can. And if you need to skip a cycle, because phase 1 is pretty short, it's just proof of concept, and so it doesn't have a long length usually. And so we encourage you to wait a cycle, and that's not a problem whatsoever. You might want to just write a brief description in your phase 2 application for the next cycle of why you waited, but you don't have to go into length about that.
Thanks, Melinda. We got another question in here that says, is the technical narrative from a report? So is there a technical report from phase 1 that's required for the phase 2 application? And yes, that answer is a little bit of yes and a little bit of no. One of the items that I had on the screen that should be addressed within your project narrative is your progress towards your phase 1 goals. And so we don't need that full report. Taking that full report would probably take up a large portion of your project narrative. We don't want you to have to do that, but we do want that demonstration, through that, that section of the project narrative, to kind of demonstrate that you have worked and you have succeeded in meeting those goals and objectives that were outlined in phase 1, because you're just going to be building upon those in phase 2. I had a super secret chat with one of our budget people on this question, this one question that's been floating around in the Q&A box for a little while. The question was, do you need a full budget justification breakdown for any subcontractors? And what you really need, my super secret intel tells me that you need to get like a statement of work from those subcontractors. Sometimes the statement of work might be included in a letter of commitment, but you don't necessarily need a highly everything in detail, but it should be, if you're going to have a subcontract, then they'll have their subcontract budget attached to your budget. They're two different separate forms. Yeah, there's in the application package, there's the R&R budget form, which is your budget form. But then if you're going to have a subcontractor, they have an identical looking form, but it's labeled subcontract budget. And that will have like a justification that they will attach to that as well.
Thank you, Tammy. That's very helpful. I summarized that in the chat because I do believe the question and answers will be available to the attendees afterwards. Dave, there's a question in the chat about what if our research in phase 1 lends itself better to another topic area? Should we still just stay in the original. Do you want to address that, Dave?
Sure, that's a good question. So if your phase one proof of concept shows that it's more suited for a different topic area, have we encountered that before? I'm just trying to remember if
I
we've
think
ever.
we generally encourage people to stick with the topic area that in which they began. So
But
hopefully,
it is not stated in the RFA that you have to stay in the same topic area. So if you do find, I think that if your results from phase one have redirected you to have an impact in another topic area, the important thing would be to have a consultation with
Yes.
your phase one topic area leader, and then also with that potential phase two topic area national program leader to make sure that making that switch is advisable between not only your current topic area, but your potential phase two application topic area.
So it's not very common in terms
it's
of.
not. It is not. So, so usually we catch it, I'd say, Dave, wouldn't you say in phase one, if you've applied to a topic area that the national program leaders feel that you would better fit in a different topic. That's usually caught in phase one.
Right.
And I suppose there's situations where in doing the proof of concept research, you get steered a different way, but I think that's fairly unusual. But as Tammy says, it's not in the RFA. You are allowed to do that. The key is, as she said, communicating with everybody about that, so it's understood.
Yep. Okay, just maybe some further clarification on whether still having an open phase one while you apply for phase two, if that's a new development. No, that's not a new development. But like I said, you have to be ready because you cannot have funding at the same time. So you have to make sure that that's ready to close out your phase one if you are recommended for a phase two award. Dave, there's a question in the chat that I think would be good for you. You can decide not to address it if you want. But the question is, does a prospective CRADA with an ARS lab have to be signed prior to submission in order for it to count as that tiebreaker?
It would be good to have the agreement in place. And all what it takes is a conversation with the researcher at the federal lab to see if there's, the common ground to where a CRADA makes sense. And it's a simple agreement. So it's not very complicated. So it would be good to have that in advance. You can state that you want to have a CRADA, but if you don't have one at the time of application, you really don't. So
right. Yes, and I'll just add to that it does take some time to develop a CRADA agreement, but that doesn't necessarily mean it takes a lot of work on your part. A lot of the work is on the technology transfer office within ARS to find a match for you. So so I believe my understanding is that the first form you fill out is only a one-page form, maybe 6 to 8 questions about your project, and that gets the process started. So I encourage you to, if you think that it would be helpful to use some federal lab resources, I encourage you just to check that out about a CRADA agreement, because it is an advantage not only in the ranking process, in the giving you advantage for an award, but it's also an advantage in that you get to use their facilities, and that's a great cost savings. So, and their equipment. So, think about that, I would say.
At this time, we don't have any open questions in the chat, I think if nothing shows up here in the next minute or so, we're gonna probably work to wrap up this webinar. Oh, and just as I say that, here's a follow-on question with the, is there a website to help find the ARS labs that you're working on your research area?
Yeah, and I shared that in the presentation. It's through the Office of Technology Transfer. If you go back, no, I know we gotta share
I'm
the
gonna
slide
put it
deck,
on the
so,
slide,
yeah. If you could
or I'm gonna just put it in the chat.
put it
Sorry.
in the chat, yeah.
I have it up if you want me to put it in. Do you have it already?
Yep.
And that's the website that'll take you directly to the Office of Technology Transfer within ARS. And you can peruse through the different technologies. You can also schedule a meeting to visit with someone if you'd like.
And now, if you do have any questions as you're opening up your application in grants.gov and you're starting to fill out things, if you run across any questions, remember SBIR@USDA.gov for any application process questions. And then if you have any technical questions, please reach out to your topic area national program leaders for those technical questions. With that, I don't see any other questions coming up in the chat. So let's just work on wrapping up this webinar. Thank you all for coming today. It was great disseminating some information to you. And good luck with all of your applications.
Yes, we wish you great luck, and we hope this was a helpful webinar.